Are you playing Vanguard the right way, or are you making the biggest mistake that costs your team the game? If you're hanging back, playing it safe, or letting your DPS take the heat, you're doing it wrong. The Vanguard isn't just a tank, it's the backbone of the team. And today I'm going to be showing you exactly how to master it, dominate your enemies, and carry your squad to victory. Welcome back to episode 2 of Duck's Masterclass on Tanks. Subscribe if you're new, like the video if you like it, and without further ado, I hope you sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Now, if you haven't already seen the first video in the series, make sure to click top right. Now, playing as a Vanguard in any team-based game isn't just about soaking up damage, it's about controlling engagements, protecting your teammates, and setting the tempo of battle. Yet, one of the most common mistakes players make when taking on this role is hanging back, playing too cautiously, or prioritizing personal survival over the team's success. Now, if you're still more new to the role of Vanguard or playing a tank in one of these hero-based shooters, you might be wondering why you must stay in the front. Now, Vanguards are built to lead the charge, whether they are melee bruisers or even ranged tanks. They have higher base health, damage reduction mechanics, and often abilities that enhance their durability. For example, Venom, who has his shield ability, where he can turn lost HP into a shield. Now, this allows them to take the brunt of enemy fire while creating openings for their team. However, failing to be on the front lines can cause several major problems. One of the first major problems is that your team loses its quote-unquote shield. Without you absorbing pressure, DPS characters who usually have lower health become easy targets. Next, your supports become even more exposed. And no, I'm not talking about that type of exposure. Without a frontline presence, enemy divers and assassins, take for example Black Panther or Psylocke, can easily get past your team's defenses and pick off characters like Adam Warlock who have extremely low mobility but are still super impactful to your team's survival. And last but not least, the enemies will actually end up dictating the fight. If you don't step up, the opposing Vanguard can push aggressively without fear of resistance, putting your team on the defense rather than being on the offense. As we know, in Marvelrivals, taking space is one of the main priorities and main tasks of any Vanguard. And if you don't know what I mean by taking space, make sure to click top right so you see the first video and you get a better understanding. Now we come to engaging effectively, positioning, and even targeting. Even though some Vanguards like Penny Parker have range capabilities, that doesn't mean they should stay in the back. Instead, they need to focus on enemy Vanguards first. This is the key to competitive play because enemy tanks will receive healing and sustain over time, making prolonged fights challenging. Another important thing is zone out high value target. Typically, you want to use abilities to push enemy DPS or Duelist players back or keep them occupied so they can't freely damage your team. Now, this is certainly true if you're playing like a off-tank role. Now, an off-tank, for example, is going to be characters like Captain America, Thor, Hulk, anyone that's not like a main shield like Doctor Strange. When you're playing this off-tank role and an enemy DPS dives your backline, you should be the one peeling, not necessarily your main tank. You need to be harassing that diver so they can't make too much of a mess and your team can sustain itself. Now, you always want to make sure you're also providing space for your damage dealers. A well-positioned Vanguard can force enemy attention, creating safe opportunities for your team to deal consistent damage. And if you're not taking space as a Vanguard, then you're failing at one of your main jobs. Now, this is something I like to call the Battle of Vanguards or even a test of endurance. Now, fighting another Vanguard can feel like a war of attrition, especially in a competitive play where both sides have supports constantly healing them. Of course, if the supports are good. Now, in order to break this quote-unquote stalemate, there's a couple things you should consider. Now, one of the first things you should do is coordinate with your DPS to focus down one target quickly. Usually, at least in higher ranks, the tanks should always be the person with the loudest voice, coordinating your team to take down one specific hero, because having your entire team focus one enemy is a lot quicker than everyone shooting at anything. Now, you should also consider forcing the enemy healer to reposition by disrupting the backline. Now, this is especially true if you're playing a Vanguard that has very high dive capabilities. Again, for example, you have characters maybe like Thor, Captain America, Hulk, or even Venom that can really disrupt the enemy. Now, you should always consider using cooldowns wisely. You always want to avoid wasting defensive abilities early. Timing is key to surviving longer engagements. Now, that's certainly true because on Vanguards, a lot of the cooldowns take quite a while to come back. Even though it says 12 seconds, it might feel like an eternity to actually be able to help your team out. So it's always best to learn when and where to use it properly. Now, ultimately, the Vanguard role is about commitment. Once you're in the fight, you need to stay engaged, protect your teammates, and dictate the battlefield flow. If you're hesitant or stay too far back, your team will struggle and the enemy team will take control. And if you're looking to take control of your diet, you should definitely check out Control. Are you tired of skipping meals or grabbing junk food because you're always on the go? Well, say hello to Control, the meal replacement shake that actually tastes amazing. Now, whether you're grinding through work, gaming late into the night, or just need a quick nutritious boost, Control has your back. Of course, packed with all the good stuff: proteins, vitamins, fiber. You'll feel full and fueled without sacrificing flavor. Oh, and did I mention the flavors? Cinnamon toast, fruity flakes, cookies and creams. It's like your favorite childhood cereals, but grown up and good for you. Now, not only that, they also have a wide variety of protein bars and even protein cookies, with my personal favorites being the peanut butter pieces cookies and of course the peanut butter s'mores protein bars. And let me tell you, these peanut butter s'mores bars are amazing and they're always sold out, so you should definitely get your hands on trying it. So stop settling for bland, boring shakes. Level up your nutrition at drinkcontrol.com and take control of your day. That's drinkctrl.com. Go get yours now and make sure to use code DUCK for 10% at checkout. Now, Vanguards play a pivotal role in shaping a match's outcome, but unlike duelists or strategists, you can't just main one character and expect success in every game, although that often does vary. Each Vanguard comes with a unique kit designed to handle specific combat scenarios, making adaptability a key trait for any high-level player. So let's break down the best Vanguards for different competitive situations and why their abilities make them the optimal choice. And if you're finding this video helpful or entertaining at all, why not subscribe? Everyone and anyone is welcome into the pond. Now, this first section is noted as clearing up the enemy's defensive line, kind of like diving and disrupting the enemy's backline in a sense. Now, here's probably some of your best choices. We have Thor, Hulk, and Venom. But why? For Thor, with his high burst damage and crowd control abilities, Thor is excellent at disrupting enemy formations and forcing enemies out of cover. You're also really just a huge nuisance to anyone on the other team. Now, if not banned, you have Hulk. His sheer durability and area denial abilities make him perfect for breaking through defensive holds and soaking up damage while your team pushes. And he also has an incredible team up ability with Iron Man and Doctor Strange as the anchor, but of course this is only the case if he's not banned. Now, you also have a hero like Venom. His aggressive sustain mechanics allow him to pressure defenders relentlessly, forcing them into bad positions or outright eliminating squishy enemies. Now, that's cool and all, but what's the strategy when you pick these three heroes? Well, typically you use these Vanguards to break entrenched enemies. So enemies set up, you have like a Doctor Strange and a Punisher turret, all set up, all fancy like. But whether they are dug behind barriers, holding a choke point, or controlling a key defensive areas, most of the times these heroes will help you break through that. But of course, that always depends if they have the kidnapper on the other team. Now, when you're defending an objective or a key strategic area, there's a couple choices you could consider. And honestly, I think one of these choices is actually undervalued a lot, and that is you have Penny Parker and Groot. And you might be wondering why. Why did I say these two heroes? Well, for Penny Parker, with her range zoning capabilities and deployable defenses, she can lock down an area while dealing solid damage. Of all my time being up here in GM and Celestial, I've only seen actually a couple Penny Parkers, do what they're supposed to do. And I truly believe that this character is really undervalued and not that many people are playing her. I mean, sure, there's better choices, but I think when you're trying to defend an objective or a choke point, like a first point type of system, then she excels in that role. Now, another hero that's very solid at defending objective or an area is Groot. His extra health with his ironwood walls, he has a ton of crowd control abilities, and he's really tanky. He can also output a ton of damage and make him an ideal immovable defender capable of keeping enemies off the objective for extended periods. You can easily lead enemies into traps with your walls or just completely cut off ways to go through. Now, what is the strategy for defending an objective or an area? These Vanguards are most effective when playing reactively, fortifying an area and making it difficult for the enemy to push in. Of course, positioning and ability cooldown management are crucial for holding ground successfully and just generally playing these two heroes. Now, in the case of protecting your teammates or, being the frontline, being the frontman, whatever you want to call it, your best two choices are going to be Doctor Strange and Magneto. Of course, everybody has their own opinions, but this is typically what you want to do. And you might be thinking, why? Well, for Doctor Strange, his barriers, teleportation, and enemy displacement abilities allow him to mitigate damage and reposition teammates safely. Now, in my opinion, he's probably one of the most crucial parts of a team composition. He's essentially the packed leader. Everyone's following behind him, staying behind him, and just looking for what he does. Now, I think Magneto is also an excellent example of someone who protects your teammates. Magneto, while known for his high utility, Magneto also excels in controlling fights by manipulating enemy positions and blocking incoming threats. He also does a fantastic job at countering strategist ultimates and honestly just can do a ton of damage. Now, here's the strategy. When running a supportive Vanguard, your job isn't just to absorb damage, it's to interfere with enemy targeting, block key abilities, and create openings for your team to reposition or even counterattack. And they're mostly seen as the main tanks. Because of that, they can solo tank in matches, but it's definitely not the best thing in the world. Now, this next role is acting kind of like a substitute DPS if you want it, or like a off tank or a dive tank, whatever. And your best choices are Thor or Captain America. Now, why Thor? He can deal immense burst damage while maintaining his frontline presence, making him a deadly hybrid tank DPS. Now, because he doesn't really have a shield, he's better suited as this being a nuisance and dealing damage. Now, on the other hand, you have Captain America, and you might be thinking, why Captain America acting as a sub-DPS? Now, I believe Captain America fits this role because his balanced mix of defense, mobility, and offensive pressure, Cap can fill in as additional damage dealer when needed. Now, you might not be doing a ton of damage, but you being in the enemy's backline causing a nuisance can still be super beneficial for your team. Now, what's this strategy as acting as a sub-DPS? If your team lacks raw DPS firepower, some Vanguards can lean into an aggressive playstyle to add extra damage output. Now, this is particularly useful when playing double tank setups or when you need to punish enemies' mistakes quickly. Though it's not, a perfect strategy, it is something that you can do. Now, what's our final thoughts or takeaway from this? While it's possible to win with any Vanguard, choosing the wrong one for a specific situation puts your team at a serious disadvantage. A great Vanguard player knows when to switch heroes mid-match to counter the enemy's strategy or better support their team's objectives. Now, our key takeaways are to understand your team's needs before selecting a Vanguard. You always want to be flexible, you can't rely on just one hero for every match, and you always want to master multiple Vanguards so you can switch roles fluidly. By playing the right Vanguard at the right time, you maximize your impact, frustrate the enemy, and lead your team to victory. Now, playing as a tank isn't just about absorbing damage, it's about dictating engagements, controlling enemy movements, and ensuring your team stays alive long enough to secure objective. While it might seem like the enemy frontline is your main concern, the truth is you are not their priority target. Smart enemies will always try to bypass you to eliminate high-value targets like strategists or duelist characters, especially if they have agile flankers like Iron Fist, Spider-Man, Black Panther, or even Psylocke. And I will say in the payload game mode, where fights are more spread out, these backline threats become even harder to manage. That's why tank or Vanguard players must have constant battlefield awareness, not just of what's in front of them, but of everything happening behind and around them. Now, countering flankers as a tank can seem like a nightmarish task, but here's some tips that can really help you out. Now, I recommend always glance back and ping enemies who are trying to sneak into your backline. Doing a 180 here and there to see where your backline is positioned is very helpful. Another thing to keep in mind, if your strategists or duelist characters are out of position, you should warn them and reposition yourself to block potential threats. Now, you should also try to predict enemy movement. For example, if you see a Spider-Man disappearing from the front line, expect him to be setting up a flank. Now, as you put more time or hours into the game, it becomes a whole lot easier to predict enemy movement and understand the natural flow and pace of the game. Now, you should always look to isolate and disrupt flankers immediately. The moment a flanker jumps into your backline, you need to react immediately. You can do so by mark them for your team so everyone knows they are a priority target, or literally just tell on voice comms like who you should be focusing, and you should always look to engage them aggressively. Most flankers rely on quick kills and low sustain, meaning they'll struggle against a tank in a prolonged fight. Now, something that's heavily undervalued is body block their escape route, forcing them into bad positions where your team can finish them off. Now, this is something that I personally like to do. If there's a flanker in my backline and they have a direct line of sight to their own supports, meaning that the supports can heal the flankers while they're fighting, I will position myself in between the flanker and the support player and put up a shield. This makes it so that duelists can't receive the necessary healing from the support player on the enemy team. Now, of course, this is very situational and sometimes rather difficult to pull off, but it's just something helpful or useful to know. With that being said, one of the hardest balancing acts as a tank is handling flankers while holding the line against the enemy frontline. If you fully commit to chasing a flanker, the enemy Vanguard will push in freely, crushing your DPS and supports. Instead, apply pressure without overcommitting. Try to force the person flanking to retreat rather than chase them across the map. You should also look to use crowd control abilities, CC for short. Stuns, slows, or even knockbacks can disrupt the flanker long enough for your team to clean them up. Now, you also need to learn how to communicate properly. Let your DPS or strategists know if they need to reposition or play safer while you handle both fronts. Although I can't guarantee you that they're actually going to listen to you, it's just something that you can be aware of and do. One of the biggest challenges as a Vanguard is figuring out how far you can push without overextending. With the highest HP pool among all roles, it's easy to feel invincible, especially when playing high damage tanks like Thor. But even the strongest tanks can be punished if they push too aggressively without backup or fail to consider the enemy's team threats and abilities. Unlike other roles, there's no fixed safe zone for Vanguards. Your position should constantly adapt based on enemy team composition and abilities, your team's positioning, and ultimate ability readiness. Now, how do you identify how far you can actually push at any given time? First and foremost, does the enemy team have powerful pushback tools? Now, characters like Luna Snow, who can freeze you, Mantis, who can sleep you, and even Invisible Woman, who can suck and blow you. Interpret it as you want. Now, these abilities can knock you back or displace you, making it dangerous to overextend near the enemy's objective. Now, to counter this, position yourself further from key areas to deny them a chance to use their ultimates effectively. Now, you also have to consider, are your teammates close enough to actually support you if need be? Pushing deep into enemy territory without backup turns you into a free elimination. Always keep an eye on your team's positioning before committing to an engagement. You also have to be aware of enemies respawning or even rotating. If you're winning a fight, pushing too far can put you in a bad spot if the enemy spawns close by. Now, here's a better example. If you're playing a character like Thor and trying to zone out a Luna Snow, you don't want to fight directly on the objective. Instead, position yourself in a way that forces her to waste her freeze ability before she actually reaches the fight, making it easier to neutralize her. So when do you actually play aggressive versus when to hold back? A good Vanguard understands the flow of battle and adjusts accordingly. So when do you actually go aggressive? When your team has ready ultimates for a coordinated push, the enemy has just used their key defensive abilities or ultimates, or if you see an opportunity to break the enemy's formation by diving in. But you also have to be prepared to understand when to actually hold back. First, is your team too far back to assist in any given fight? Now, does the enemy team have any hard counter abilities like displacement or crowd control that can turn the fight? And you also have to consider, is the enemy spawn too close, making it easy for them to overwhelm you? Now, if you still didn't really understand that, let me give you an example. If your team is setting up for some sort of big ultimate combo, you shouldn't dive in first. Wait until your DPS or strategist engage, then follow up to secure kills. Diving in too early wastes your durability and puts you at risk without backup. Now, when it comes to playing Vanguard, there is some sort of art. The frontline battle between tanks might seem slow and uneventful at times, but it serves as a crucial strategic purpose. It's a test of patience, endurance, and discipline. Now, while Vanguards clash and sustain each other, the real battle is happening in the minds of your opponent. Over time, Duelists and other impatient DPS players may feel frustrated by this stalemate and try to force an opening by diving into the backline. That's exactly what you want to happen, because the moment they step out of position, they give your team an opportunity to turn the fight in your favor. Now, there is a waiting game or forcing the enemy to make a mistake. As a Vanguard, your role isn't just about absorbing damage, it's about manipulating the enemy's mindset. So here's how you set the trap for an overeager Duelist. First, you want to maintain steady pressure on the enemy frontline without overcommitting. If you push too aggressively, the enemy team won't feel the need to break formation. If you hold the line just right, enemy Duelists will eventually feel forced to make a play and break that stalemate. And you always want to watch for signs of impatience. Duelists thrive on action. The longer they're stuck in a slow fight, the more likely they are to make a reckless play. If you notice a Duelist pacing near the edge of the fight, constantly peeking towards your backline or vanishing for longer periods, they might be setting up for a flank or an all-in attack. So you always need to stay aware of missing enemies. If you suddenly notice one fewer enemy in the front line, it's likely that a Duelist is trying to slip past you towards your team strategist or even Duelist. This is your cue to act. They've taken the bait. Now, how to counter a diving Duelist or flipping the fight? The second a Duelist jumps into your backline, it's time to push the mistake. Here's what you need to do. Step 1, push the enemy tanks away. At this point right now, the front line doesn't matter anymore. Your priority is now to disrupt their structure and isolate the Duelist. Use crowd control abilities like stuns, nutbacks, or slows to push their tanks away. This creates space for your team to collapse on the out of position Duelist. Now, step 2 is to mark and call out the isolated Duelist, ping or call out the target so your team immediately focuses them down. Position yourself between the enemy frontline and your team to prevent other enemies from assisting their trapped Duelist. If the Duelist tries to escape, body blocking their movement or use crowd control abilities to keep them locked in the fight. And then step 3, let your team get a kill. Remember, your job isn't to secure the elimination, it's to create the opportunity for them. A Duelist dying early in a fight is devastating for the enemy team, as it removes one of their highest damage threats. This not only shifts the momentum in your favor, but also boosts your team's confidence. Now, there's always that psychological edge, and that is gaining your team's trust. One of the biggest benefits of playing a solid Vanguard isn't just your in-game performance, it's the trust you build with your teammates. When your team sees you consistently peeling for them, they will feel safer and play more confidently. When your DPS knows you're there to protect them, they can focus on dealing damage without hesitation. And when your strategists see you shutting down the threats before they become a problem, they will trust you to lead the charge. Now, this positive momentum snowballs. A team that trusts its tank performs better, takes smarter fights, and plays more aggressively when actually needed. Now, mastering the Vanguard role isn't about brute force, it's about strategic patience and control. First, hold the line and let enemy make the first mistake. Be ready to shift focus immediately when a Duelist overcommits. Use crowd control and positioning to isolate targets and create openings for your team. Finally, support your teammates instead of chasing kills. Your job is to enable them. By playing smart, patient, and adaptive, you turn an enemy's impatience into their downfall and lead your team to constant victories. With that being said, hopefully this video has helped you in any way, shape, or form, or you just found it entertaining. And if you did, do me a huge favor and hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. It greatly helps me out and it's the best way to support me. But regardless, I hope you have a great day and I'll catch you in the next one.